been called out of Egypt, literally. We haven't been of the global principle in it and then trying to relate to it personally. So that's what I want to try and do today with the follow-on, and to show how the story now that we go to is really, it's there as a follow-on to the story of Balaam. It's there as because of what Balaam did, but God has put it there also to highlight the very opposite of what Balaam did. So where Balaam became the negative example, we're now going to look at the positive example. I know that when we left off last session, you sort of hung there feeling quite sort of negative, and Balaam died. And then, but today we're going to look at a more positive story. So, for me, these stories need to become parables about the choices and decisions that we have to make right now to prepare ourselves to enter the kingdom. Because that's where these people are. They're on the edge of the kingdom, and that's what we need to focus on. So I'm not going to make you turn up anything. I'm going to give you everything on the screen to make it easy. It's too cold to turn up stuff. And this is where we left off, in Numbers 31 at verse 8. It says, "They slew the kings of Midian, beside the rest of them that were slain, namely Evi, Rechem, and Zur, and Hur, and Reba, 5 kings of Midian. Balaam also the son of Beor they slew with the sword." So what actually happened here was that God told Israel to go and deal with the Midianites because of what they had done in sending their daughters to intentionally get Israel to commit that sin and to fornicate and to worship Baal in the high places. And that's given to us in 31 verse 1 and 2, where God speaks to Moses and he says, "Avenge the children of Israel of the Midianites." So Israel was to be avenged for that sort of premeditated wrong which had been done to them. And so really it's a judgment there on Midian for initiating the sin. But actually verse 1 of chapter 31, there's a slight abbreviation of a couple of verses in chapter 25. So if you have a look there, what we have is a little bit more detail of what happened. And this is where God says to Moses, he says in more detail, go and vex the Midianites and smite them, for they vex you with their wiles, wherewith they have beguiled you in the matter of Peor, and in the matter of Cosbi, the daughter of a prince of Midian, their sister, which was slain in the day of the plague for Peor's sake. And so this detail here is very interesting, because what I want you to notice up front is that there is a distinction between the matter of Peor and the matter of Cosbi. And we're going to deal with that distinction. That was slain, that she was slain, her name was Cosbi, and she was the daughter of Zur. So, if she's the daughter of Zur, and who is one of the kings of Midian, and you come back to 31 verse 8, it's going away from me. So 31 verse 8, anyway, she was one of, he was, the father was one of those 5 princes of Midian. So that was one of the ones that was killed when Israel went and destroyed the kings of Midian. And so Balaam was killed along with those kings of Midian, and possibly he had gone there to sort of commiserate with them at the loss of Cosbi. It was his great idea, wasn't it, to send those girls in. And so possibly now on his way back, maybe he went to apologize to Zur, have a funeral, whatever, I don't know. But the record seems to read that he found some sort of fellowship with the Midianite kings on his way back to Bethel in Mesopotamia. And so in some way you can't help feeling that there's a sort of a poetic justice in that Balaam ends back with with those kings at the time of his death, you'll remember that he got up and he said, I'm going back to my people. And God let him get back to the Midianites and then ended his life. And it was like God was saying, well, these are your people. That's where you made the choice that's who you made the choice to be with and to be like. And that's where God ended his life. These are your people. So between Balaam leaving Balak after that actually the fourth prophecy and him landing up dead, we have this whole other incident here where we are given this story of how the Midianite girls came in, and we are given, I believe, the solution, in fact, to the Balaam problem. So what Balaam went out to achieve and how he failed and everything that he did, the exact opposite of that is given to us in the next story here with Phineas. See, Balaam could have made the right decision. He could have not, chosen not to go with the princes of Midian. He could have chosen not to deceive the king Balak. He could have chosen not to destroy Israel with his perception would cause them to be weakened and to fall. But he didn't. Balaam, at every single opportunity, decided to stay in the game. He decided to keep on playing and to see if he could get a gap to twist things in his favor without breaking the rules, because he really, really, really wanted that honor. So what should he have done? How should he have felt? How should he have reacted to the circumstances that he found himself in? And really the issue here for us is to remember that we are in essence Balaam, or we can be Balaam. We might be faced with the same problems, the same challenges, the same temptations. Maybe sometimes we really want honor. Maybe sometimes we're presented with opportunities to get honor and to have a struggle against the flesh and to receive that honor. But whatever it is, it may not be in the best interests of our family here. So what are we to do? And so this is where I believe that the solution to the Balaam problem is given to us in the middle of the events recorded in Numbers 25. So what Balaam activity is going on up in the high places way above Israel, the Israelites are camped down on those beautiful plains and the acacia groves of Moab. So Balaam departs and these Midianite women are sent in, and what happens is obviously very, very bad. But what I want you to notice is that in verse 2 of chapter 25, it says that they, the Midianite girls, called the people unto the sacrifices of their gods, and the people did eat and bowed down to their gods. And what you'll notice at this point is that Israel are doing this sort of, you can almost say, on the fringes. I don't know what sort of vision you have of what was going on, but it seems to be that what happened is that the Midianites came to the edges of the camp, and that they actually called people away from the camp and took them up to the high places. That word called there is like invitation. They were preaching to the people about what they did, how they worshiped Baal. And they called them away to the high places. So I think at this point it's quite important to realize that they didn't sort of come in to the camp and they weren't running around in the tents of the camp and doing all those things there. There were no images of Baal in the camp of Israel at this stage. What they did was that they called people away. They cried out to them, they called them, that's what the word means. And they drew them away. And it says in verse 3 that Israel joined himself unto Baal Peor. And that word there, it means that they were sort of, you know how the Levites means to join. Levi means to join. These people became like priests of Baal Peor. And so the anger of God is extremely fierce at this, because now they had become sort of people who were proclaiming that they ought to be part of this Baal worship rather than I had it all on one slide. And so God is really upset with this. And so what actually happens is that a plague starts. And it seems to be that the plague starts not necessarily because of what they were doing, but because God actually causes this plague to start. And in verse 8 and 9 it says that the plague was stayed from the children of Israel, and those that died in the plague were 20 and 4,000. So what we can see here is that the idolatry and the fornication is the error, and God's judgment is actually the plague. So what was God really doing? Well, I think here that the plague is obviously, a catchy disease. It's some kind of catchy disease that spreads around the camp. And it really speeds up the dying process. So it's God's way of saying here that, look, what you're doing here is very, very much against my plan and my purpose. They were already dying, but a plague speeds up that process. And so it's God's way of saying, there's no point in you doing this. If you're going to do this, then you're thwarting my plan with you. You're destroying it. So your actions are also contagious, like a plague. If you do this, it's going to spread around the camp. And so God's plague that he lets ravish on the people is going to destroy his plan. And so it's very, very interesting that there were 24,000 people that died. He's saying, if you carry on like this, natural and spiritual Israel are finished. There's absolutely no point. And that's really where we come to here with the solution. Where God says to Moses, he says, and this is the very, very hard part for us to maybe grapple with at times. He says, take all the heads of the people and hang them up before the Lord against the sun, that the fierce anger of the Lord may be turned away from Israel. And Moses said unto the judges of Israel, stay ye every one his men that were joined unto Baal Peor. So the command that goes out from God is very specific. The judges of Israel had to implement the justice that God had ordained. That's what it says in verse 5. When Moses turns around to the people and he says, this is what God has told me, he says the judges of Israel are to slay every one his men that were joined unto Baal Peor. So the people within Israel are now going to be responsible for getting rid of what has happened. So what I'm trying to say, what that is saying then, is that the plague wasn't the method that God was using to get rid of what was going on. In other words, there were people that had gone up into the high places that were, doing these things, that were still alive, and there was a plague running through the whole camp. And God says, if you want that to stop, you're going to have to take people from each tribe, and they're going to have to dedicate themselves to getting rid of the offenders that have committed these things. And that's the hard thing, because what that meant was that God was saying, look, you're now caught between a rock and a hard place. It's a very, very difficult thing when you think about it. Because God is saying, you're the head of your tribe. You're the head of your family. That's what he was really saying. So you're going to go, you're going to be ordained now as a judge. And you're going to be responsible for going and getting rid of the main offenders in that matter, the matter of Baal Peor. And you're going to hang them up in the sun before me. And then, because you've done that, then the plague is going to be stopped. And when you really stop and think about it, now that's when things get quite interesting. We start to think about what that might mean. How does that relate to us? How do we make that personal? And that's what I want to talk to you about now. This is quite interesting when we match up these words here with what God has said and what Moses has said. Because the word there, heads, is the word Rosh, the leaders. So it's a little bit ambiguous, but where God says to Moses, take all the heads of the people and hang them up before the Lord against the sun, he's not saying like lop off the heads of the people and hang those up before the sun. What he's saying is, he's saying appoint leaders of the people. Appoint leaders, and then go and get the people who are the offenders and hang them up before God in the sun. So at the end of the day, if you want to stop this plague, there are going to be offenders impaled, which is the word hang. They're going to be offenders. The main offenders are going to be impaled in the sun before God. But God has said, appoint leaders. And so when Moses comes to the people, all of a sudden he doesn't say, get leaders of the people. What he says is, he says appoint judges. And that is actually a different word. It's not the word Rosh, it's the word Shaphat, which is a judge, a righteous judge. And so you might argue and say, well, it can't be the same. These can't be the same things because the Hebrew words are different. God said, take the heads of the people, the Rosh, the leaders of the people. But I think in that puzzle lies the answer. Because what we are being taught here is that the leaders of the people had to transition themselves to becoming sort of righteous and fair justice administrators. And that's the whole point. What was happening here was a leadership crisis. And God said, if you want to beat this thing, then you need to self-moderate. You need to grow up. You need to transition yourselves. If you want to be good leaders, you need to become great judges, good justice administrators. And that's the answer. The thing that was going to turn away God's anger, and turn the plague was a sufficient demonstration from among the people themselves to show that they could self-judge and self-moderate their behavior. So how's it going to happen? How's it going to pan out? Did they really have to go and kill their own family members? Was that the solution? How do we do that? Am I standing up here and saying that this story is teaching us that we need to run around our meetings and kill people who are doing wrong things? Of course not, but let's see how it works out. So they're caught between a rock and a hard place, aren't they? If they don't self-moderate, if they don't get rid of the evil members, the plague would slay them. Can you feel the helplessness of the people? They're caught in between a very difficult situation. And it's in that context where we have a great amount of pain, a great amount of death. 24,000 people are dead from a plague that's sweeping through the camp. People are at the tabernacle wailing, falling down, crying. No one can do anything. On the one hand, that people are dying, family members are dying anyway. On the other hand, they've been told, get up and sort out the main offenders to stop this plague. And no one can move. And at that point, in the middle of all that, this incredible act happens. It says, and behold, in the middle of this chapter of Numbers 25, it says, behold. It's like God can't even comprehend that this thing is now happening. This is an amazing event. In the middle of all this, when there's these dead bodies everywhere, behold, this thing is going to happen. It says there that one of the children of Israel came and brought unto his brethren a Midianite woman in the sight of Moses, and in the sight of all the congregation of the children of Israel, who were weeping before the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. You see, this is a time where we once again see a complete disregard, an utter disregard for the needs and the feelings of others. This is absolutely brazen. God has said what you need to do is you need to take the main offenders. They were doing things up in the high places, away from the camp. That's where they were doing it. The people in the middle may have been hearing distantly the beats of the drums and maybe at night the fires that were in those high places. But they wouldn't have even seen what was going on. And this plague was now sweeping through the camp. Most of them weren't up there. And now all of a sudden, and God had said, you take those main offenders and you impale them in the noonday sun in front of me. You need to self-judge. You need to self-moderate. And while they can't do that, in the middle of all that, in the noonday sun comes Zimri and Cosby, brazen as anything. And what they've done is, they are bringing what's happened in the high places away from the camp, and they've brought it directly into the middle of the camp. And there's dead bodies everywhere. And all as they can think of is their own self-gratification. They're bringing it in. And you see, when it says there that they came and presented Zimri brought Cosby in and brought her in, there was so much more to that word. It wasn't just for him. He wasn't coming to marry her. He was bringing it, and the way that he presented and brought her to his brethren, it indicates that there was way more to that than what meets the eye. She wasn't only going to be with him. That's what the word means. See, this was a very, very, very special act. And that's why God said in the matter of Peel and in the matter of Cosby, it was really brazen. It was pushing the boundaries on every level. So on where they were, on what they were doing, and who openly knew about it. It was really an open chapter. He had said, hang the offenders up in the sun and the plague would stop. And in complete disregard for that, Zimri and Cosby came in the noonday sun in front of everyone, and they take God on. What a lack of concern they had for everyone else. And you really get to see that same spirit of Balaam here. That spirit that doesn't care about the family, doesn't care that there's people dying, doesn't care that people are weeping and crying at the tabernacle, because that's what they were doing. And they coming in here for a good time. And the interesting thing here is that Moses has received the voice. But not even he can move a muscle here. And it's here that we meet Phinehas, who stands up and he does something about it. Phinehas is the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron. And just, as this is about to begin, he realizes that this plague, which has now killed 24,000 people, it's going to wipe out the camp if nothing is done. And so Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the priest, saw it, and he rose up from among the congregation, and he took a javelin in his hand, and he went after the man of Israel into the tent and thrust both of them through, the man of Israel and the woman through her belly. And so the plague was stayed from the children of Israel. And what I'm going to suggest to you is that God didn't actually stop the plague because one man killed one offending couple. I think what happened here was that Phinehas opened the leadership door. And he stepped through strongly, boldly. He stood up. And by his actions, others followed. The command had gone out very specifically, and the judges were told that they needed to self-judge and to self-moderate and to get rid of those who had already joined themselves to Baal Peor. But they hadn't. And because they hadn't, that plague was continuing. And so when we read about this special guy, Phinehas, what we're reading about is the first person who plucks up the courage to do the unpopular for the sake of the whole, for the sake of God's family. You could see the issue at stake. And the actual effect of what he does leads the way for the others, the other leaders in Israel who are too worried, too scared to do anything, to now pluck up the courage. And when they did that, God saw that Israel had learned to self-moderate, and the plague was stopped. So to be able to draw full value out of what has happened here in our own personal capacity, I believe firmly that we need to see the characters in this story as a parable of one person. And we need to see this person as us. Israel as a whole is really one person. It's Jacob. And we need to see ourselves as Jacob. And people like Balaam, these stories are ways of thinking, where it starts as thinking and following through, it becomes an action. And you should have a way of thinking of Balaam, one that doesn't care about the family. And then you have a way of thinking like Phinehas, who will stand up for something when it's unpopular, and he'll do something about it. And so if you take Israel and consolidate them together, and you take Phinehas and push him in there, and we realize that that person is us, then we can internalize it and make it a parable about one person, about you and I. And we can see that we are battling sin personally. And God is giving us the remedy in this story. That one of the decisions that we need to make on the edge of the kingdom, when we're confronted with sin, maybe like Israel, and like Balaam, we're already down sin's path. What are we going to do? God says, I'm not going to smite you. We don't get killed for our sins right now. What God is saying is that you're already dying. I want you to deal with your sin. Show me that you can self-examine. Determine what the problem is. And show me that you want to overcome. Show me that you want to beat this thing. See, that's what God really wants from us. He wants us to be able to analyze our lives, to see where we are going wrong, to self-examine, and to get rid of those things. That's the principle. And so when we filter it through the New Testament, the thing that pops to mind is Jesus when he says,